When you look at my face, what do you see? I'll tell you what I see when I look at myself in the mirror. I see the face of a man who's let some people down. Those people, of course, being these fine commenters asking me to play different variations of their favorite hands, 10-8 suited. A very respectable hand, a hand I actually quite enjoy playing myself, a hand that I hold near and dear to my heart. I present myself to you today, a criminal, for heinous acts of sacrilege against this hand and to the game itself. Viewer discretion is advised, for the content we're about to review, some viewers may find disturbing. We find ourselves in the low jack, with 10-8 of hearts facing an RFI raised first into $15 from the player to our right. I make the call, which some may consider a little loose, but considering the power of this hand, I deemed it acceptable. We only get one more player, the cutoff, to make the call, and all the other players fold. So we're going three ways, 45 in the middle, between our two opponents to a flop that comes King 7-4 with one heart. It's really not going to be the best board for us to go for it. The king favors the range of our opponent who raised, and the rest of the board favors the cutoff range more than ours. So we're going to do a lot of folding here, even though we do have some backdoor draws. Surprisingly / interestingly, however, the raiser checks, we check, and the cutoff checks. So we're going to get a free card here on the turn that comes a favorable card, a 6. We now have a double gutter to a 5 or a 9 for a straight. The raiser checks again. We are pretty sure at this point that we own their soul, and we start bluffing here for 30 with our double gutter. Now, a bit of player profiling here for the player in the cutoff. They're definitely on the tight side pre-flop and not that aggressive even with their strong hands post-flop. So we are kind of worried about them when they make the call. As predicted, the initial raiser folds, so we're going to go heads up to a final card here, which is a 5. It gives us our straight, which is fantastic. I wasn't thinking that we were going to be able to fire a lot of bluff cards that could make our opponent fold a king, as they are kind of sticky, but now that we actually have our straight, we're feeling a lot better. There's not much to say about this hand up until this point. However, little did I know, I was about to make the worst play I've ever made in the history of me playing this game, and quite possibly one of the worst plays to exist in the history of this game in its entirety. I checked. That's right, I checked in this spot after making my straight, not out of deception, not out of going for a check raise against a king, but because I didn't realize I had a straight. I was so hyper-focused at the time at only needing the 9 for the top end of the straight for a gutter that I didn't even realize on the turn that I was double gutted. I thought I only had a gutter to a 9, and I thought I only had 10 high. Not thinking I was going to be able to bluff my opponent off of a king, I checked to give up. They instant checked back, showing us pocket jacks, and I mucked what I thought at the time was only 10 high. That's right. It is now that I paradoxically come to you asking for forgiveness for an unforgivable act. In a scuffed act of desperation to redeem myself, I did the unthinkable. I disrespected this hand twice and tried again. This time we find ourselves in the cutoff not too long later with 10-8 of diamonds facing a raise to 15 from the same player as before. I call for redemption, as does the button and the big blind. 4 ways to a flop with 60 in the middle to a flop of redemption as we flop top 2 pair. It checks to us, including the initial raiser, and so we seize the opportunity of the betting lead and bet $40. And to our surprise, all the players call. This hand takes a turn for the worst as the dealer drops the 5 of clubs. Actually, just one of the worst turns in the deck. It brings the flush in, the straights that weren't there are now there, and our top 2 pair has been significantly downgraded. When it comes up to being against 3 other players, I think it's very likely that we're going to be behind here, so when it checks to me, I check, as does the button. As if things couldn't get any worse, the dealer drops the 6 of clubs on the river. Here's a complete list of all the hands that we lose to now. It checks to me again, and I just want to get to showdown, so I check, but the button doesn't agree with that ideology and bets 75. It folds back to me, and although this is a relatively good price, considering how much is in the pot, I just don't think there's any way we can call. We lose to so many things now, and I reluctantly make the fold. I'm going to start this hand by putting the timestamp right here so we can count the hang time for this punt. We've got King 10 of clubs in the big blind facing a button straddle and 2 folds. That's right, 2 folds. One from the small blind and one from the player to my left who has folded out of turn. Trying to take advantage of the situation, I raised to 35, taking a very aggressive line here considering there's one fewer player to go against. The player next to act calls, and the rest of the players fold, so the plan is going fairly well so far. With 80 in the middle, heads up out of position, the flop comes Ace-King 5. A really good board for us, all things considered, both image and position-wise. Shouldn't really take much to do the job here. We bet 35. Our opponent calls very quickly, which I'm not too excited to see, but some player profiling here. This player is very, very loose, both pre-flop and post-flop, so they can have plenty of worse kings. They can have some lower aces that I can get them to fold. They'll even have some heart draws, maybe even some disjoint straight draws, and maybe some just lower pocket pairs. A beautiful 4 of spades on the turn allows us to keep telling our story as it really doesn't change the board at all, so we bet 80. I think we could have gone a little bit bigger here, but when our opponent calls again very quickly, I'm wondering if there was a size we could have gotten them to fold to. With a big pot brewing and a decision coming up on the river, we get the 8 of diamonds on the river. It is another fairly brick of a card, but at this point, we have showdown value. I don't think we're going to get anything worse to call, and I don't think we're going to get anything better to fold. So I decide to check, and our opponent snap checks it back and shows us Ace-Jack for actually a relatively decent hand this time to call down with. Not super excited to see that I caught him in the middle of the range when he could certainly have a lot of worse hands. It's about time we win one. What do you say? We've got Ace-King offsuit in early position, and we bump the action up to $30. Folds all the way around to the big blind, who is our only customer. So, heads up with 60 in to a flop that comes very good for us. It's Ace-4-5. Big blind checks, as they should do with most of their hands, and I do something that I don't do very often, and I check back for deception. That's right, I checked here for deception, as we're going to have a lot of very strong hands here, and it's a very dry board. I want my opponent to catch up a little bit, and if they do take the initiative to start bluffing, we are pretty high up in our range and can call down quite wide. I can talk about balance and all that, but who is to really say if I checked here for those reasons, or just out of fear from the past few hands of getting run over? The turn card keeps us at the top of our range as it's a king. Better yet, our opponent bets into us for $20. You could certainly raise here, but considering we're in position and we can always go for a raise on the river, I proceed with just a call. Off to a river that doesn't change the board at all, it's a 7. Our opponent bets 25, and this is a pretty clear raise with top 2 pair. I make it 75, trying to give my opponent a decent price to call. To our surprise, we get snap called, we show Ace-King, we're good, and our opponent mucks what they claimed was another big ace. Feels good to finally drag in a pot and start climbing out of the hole. It's been a little bit since I've gotten a little loosey-goosey with your favorite hands. Let's revisit that world for a little bit. It's folded all the way to us, and we're on the button with deuce-3 of clubs, and we raise the action up to $15. The small blind is the only non-believer, and they call, and the big blind folds. Magical flop of 5-3-3. It's not that often you get to value bet with deuce-3, but when you do, it is beautiful. We bet $10 on this pretty dry board, just trying to get our opponent to cling to anything they can. They do make the call, which is great. Now to a turn that comes at 10. It's a fantastic card. There are a lot of bad cards that can still come, as although we have a strong hand, it's fairly vulnerable. Small blind checks, and we increase our bet size to 30. Once again, to our delight, the small blind calls. We're going to go heads up to a final card. I don't know if I could have picked a much better brick card, as it's a 9. Really only adds to the combos of hands that we beat, and doesn't add too many of hands that we actually lose to. Small blind checks for a last time, and we bet a polarizing size of 85. To our surprise, our opponent doesn't take too long before folding Jack 10 of diamonds face up. Somewhat surprised to see that we pushed that hand off of top pair, but I guess I can't really blame them. Another couple hands later, we pick up another trash hand, pocket queens in the low jack, and our raise to $25 funnels down the field to just the same player from the previous hand. Heads up, out of position with 50 in the pot to a flop that comes king jack 6. Definitely a good board for us range advantage and image advantage wise, so we put in that c-bet for $35. Our opponent calls, which leaves us with the age-old question. Are they drawing, or are we dead? The 7 of diamonds on the turn does give us the second nut flush draw, so we continue with the pressure for $100. That player steam folds fairly quickly, and we steal another pot from this player with another garbage hand. Finally, with only 2 hands left to go over, we're able to move to an edge seat to capture the entire table. In this hand, we're in the cutoff with King-Jack of spades facing a hijack open to $15. Now, I certainly think that you can sparingly 3-bet this hand to isolate, but I decided to take the more passive route and just call. The button and both the blinds come along for the ride, so we're going to go 5 ways sort of in position with 75 in the middle to a flop that comes Queen 10-4. It checks to the hijack, who again bets $15. Again, I think you could raise here to try to isolate and try to take this down as a bluff to realize your equity, but with multiple players still left in the field, I decided to just call to try to maximize the chance of somebody else staying in the pot, and to reduce the chance of getting 3-bet to a value that I would not be able to call. The button calls, but both the blinds let it go. Now, since I've started filming from the edges of the table so I can actually capture the whole table, it has been harder to see the cards in the middle. However, this turn card made sure that it presented itself. That's right, we turned the nuts, and better yet, the hijack is still betting, again for only a size though of $15. Certainly going to put in a raise here, and I choose a size of $50. Now, let me tell you why I chose this small sizing. I didn't actually know the button was still in the hand. I thought I was only up against the hijack, and I was trying to get some minimum value, some thin value from the bottom end of the hijack's range from what they could call with. If I knew the button was still in the hand, I definitely would have gone bigger. The button calls, and that's how I figured out they were still in the hand, and the hijack also calls, which are things we do like to see. We're just going to hope for a clean river, and we do get that clean brick river. And it's the nice 8 of spades. We've still got the nuts. It checks to us, and we bet 130 for value. It is still on the smaller side compared to how much is in the middle, but I want to try to get some thin value from the bottom ends of a lot of hands that could be calling here. Unfortunately for our dreams of value, both players make the fold. However, it feels nice to drag in a deceptively large pot with our nuts finally making it back onto the table. It was then that our table broke and we had to move to the last remaining table of the night. We drew for seats and off we went. It certainly looked like a good table when we sat down. We had the big stack maniac directly to our right with another large stack to their right, but unfortunately for us, we really just couldn't pick up anything good. We punted off another 150 just trying to get involved, but not being able to continue. Sort of like this hand. We've got ace queen of diamonds in the small blind facing 2 limps, and we squeezed the action up to 50. To our surprise, the big blind made the call, and then it folded back around to a button, player to our right, who also made the call. With 150 in, out of position, 3 ways, the flop comes a miserable 7-6-4, no diamond. This board is just going to favor our opponent's ranges way more than ours, so I think it's just straight give-up time. We check, and it checks around on the flop. The 2 of diamonds coming in on the turn would have been a nice card to see on the flop, but it's not really going to do us much good now. We check with the same game plan of surrender. The big blind bets 80, the button raises to 250, and we just fold, and the big blind folds. So there were a couple other hands that went pretty much this same way. Not too much longer, the table actually does break, and we head on out of there. Here are the session results right here. As always, we were into the game for $1,100, out of the game for $850, booking a loss of about $250. It's during times like these, sessions played like this, where it's really important to be able to just step back from what you're doing and take a little bit of a break, take a breather, understand that we all make mistakes and that we will improve on those mistakes over time. You just have to stay focused, stay committed, and just accept that you have made some mistakes. I accept that I have made these mistakes in this session, and I am asking you, my lovely audience, to forgive me for these terrible plays, and just hope that it can get better from here. From there, as always, keep your body healthy, keep your mind healthy. This is Runner Poker. Have a good one.